Session 4 is Decoding the Hiring Process, the Insider's Guide. We're going out with a bang. I'm excited to introduce you to our host and panelists. Our host, Alex Margolis, Senior Strategic Solutions Consultant at Hearsay Systems, Liz Anderson, Director of Learning at PreSales Collective, Jack Cochran, Director of Solution Consulting at Action IQ, and Chris Beaumont, Head of PreSales and Solutions Recruitment at the Sales Recruitment Company. It's off to you, Alex. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Courtney, for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Decoding the Hiring Process, the Insider's Guide. I know that this is the last session of the day, and that everyone's been sitting here looking at their computer screens for the last couple of hours, so we're just going to try to get straight into this. So just to make sure everyone here is on the same page, I thought it would make sense to first give an overview of what that full hiring process for a pre-sales role is like. So, Liz, do you want to take us through kind of that standard hiring process?
Yeah, and I feel like standard is sometimes so different too. So I'll kind of describe some of the steps that are typically involved in the hiring process. So of course, you're going to have your recruiter screen. You're going to have your first interview with your hiring manager, and maybe you even have a second one along those lines. There's going to be some sort of either peer or cross-functional interview that you have in there, whether it is, again, one of your peers, someone in sales, someone in product, basically someone that you're going to be interacting with quite a bit. You're going to have some sort of interview with leadership, whether it's a skip level, maybe it's a head of pre-sales, or maybe it's an executive, depending on the level of role that you're going in for and how big or small the company is. And then you're going to have some sort of like technical assessment and or demonstration or presentation, something that can showcase like your skills as a solution engineer or a solutions engineering leader. And of course, order and quantity can vary by company.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So now that we all kind of understand what that hiring process is like, let's get into it a little bit more directly. I'm sure a lot of us on the call, myself included, have all been going through the hiring process a lot. And we all obviously are here to learn about that insight as to really what those hiring managers are looking for. So, Chris, do you want to start off with some ideas about what the top skills and attributes are that hiring managers are looking for in their candidates?
Yeah, of course. I would say a lot of people, it's the softer skills. So things like curiosity, I think that comes up quite a lot in conversations that I have. How easily does someone understand, or and not even necessarily how easily, but how curious, how much do they want to understand the value that they can bring to somebody or a solution can bring to somebody. So, if the solution saves them time or money, which most of the time it will, at some degree, it's why, to do with what does that? It saves you money, but then why do you need to save money? Where are you going to use that elsewhere? And that curiosity piece, I think, is really important. I'd say communication is, another one, confidence, but I think especially when you consider the technical versus the commercial, I think somebody that can, a lot of the time I speak to people that are very technical or very commercial, and it's about finding that balance. And that's different for each position or each company that you work with. Sometimes it's much more commercial, sometimes it's much more technical, but it's about finding the balance. And a lot of the time being able to, I suppose, simplify things. A lot of the time when I speak to pre-sales consultants or sales engineers or solutions engineers, they are making things easy to understand for me because I'm not technical. So that's usually quite a good tell, I think.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think it's awesome that we're all trying to work on here, making sure that the ability to take that detailed technical information can be made a little bit simpler as well. Anyone else have anything to add, Liz or Jack?
Yeah, I'll add a few things here. The way that I think about it is really around, I think, competencies. I think competencies are, what I would look for when I was a hiring manager, and is something like a really great way to think about kind of these skills as a whole. The ones that I would look for were things like coachability, communication, craftsmanship, coachability, curiosity, critical thinking, and not to make everything C's, grit. I'll highlight a few of those. I think craftsmanship is something that I think is incredibly important and sometimes forgotten about in the interview cycle. Obviously, we do want to showcase our abilities to their full extent, but craftsmanship means when you do that presentation, are you making it as readable as possible? Yeah, maybe this company is going to give you a template when it's time for you to go and give some sort of a presentation, but do you have the ability to, not put a million words on the screen? Do you have the ability to make something make sense? Because it's not just our verbal communication, but also all the different tools that we're using. Things like critical thinking. Are you able to understand when you're giving a technical assignment that if something doesn't make sense, maybe you should ask the question because maybe they gave you that to actually have you critically think, understand what's not working, and maybe they do want you to ask that question of them. And of course, grit. I guess you could also use the word tenacity if you don't like the word grit. But it's really like, are you going to, it's like almost that stick with itness. Are you going to, when you get that hard question, that when you get that hard problem, which you will inevitably get, are you going to make sure that you get that right answer and not give up?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, I think anyone who's gone through some of the longer, more grueling hiring cycles definitely understands how important that grit, that tenacity is. Between the two of you, this was obviously a whole bunch of skills that you both of you just mentioned. Do you think that there's a big difference between those skills and how they would get used by someone more like a little bit more on the technical side of being a solutions engineer versus someone who's a little more on the sales side? What are your kind of thoughts differentiating those two?
Yeah, I mean, I can start us off as well. I think it's really about having a balance of skills between the technical and kind of like the soft or like the more selling skills. Like that's what we are. Anytime that you're thinking about pre-sales, it's always kind of like a sliding curve between the technical and kind of the sales skills, but you have to have both. And I think you also have to be really adaptable to change, not only because the types of teams that you're working with, you're going to be working with an account executive, you're going to be working with many different types of people. You have to be somewhat okay with change and changing your perspectives. Even if you have a particular way that you like things done, you have to be able to adapt to different working styles. And because many times you're a bridge between both the technical and the selling part of the organization. And so to play that part, you kind of have to be able to navigate all the changes in between.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you, Liz. I suppose the difference between the technical and or other technical and sales positions is a lot of people that I've spoken to call it the glue, right? The glue between various teams, the glue between the business and the customer, certainly at the beginning of the process anyway, when you're working through the sales process. Product, how successful could that product be, or any improvements? You're ultimately the feedback loop as well, or you can be the feedback loop between sales, pre and post sales teams as well. So yeah, I think it's that kind of glue in the middle of everybody that if you do it right and you have some of the skills we talked about and some other skills as well, and understand how all those pieces are put together, how sales dynamics. So have a good relationship with your AE, which I know is a topic of conversation for a lot of people, a lot of AEs and a lot of SEs. But understanding the importance of each of those parts of the business and the impact that you can have on those. I think that's how one of the ways anyway that those skills can differ from other positions within the business.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So Shifting gears a little bit, now let's talk a little bit more rather than, kind of overall skills that someone needs to have in order to kind of get the job and succeed in that hiring process. Let's talk about what happens more in like a piece by piece base here. So the first big thing, whenever I see a new job posting on LinkedIn, right? The job's been posted 2 days ago and there's already 450 applicants that I can see have applied for this role. So clearly, the three of you being involved in the hiring side of things, it can't be expected that a hiring manager is going to look at every single one of those 450 applicants that they've had within 2 days. So Jack, I know this is the role that you're currently in right now as the director here. Can you give us a little insight on how the hiring managers can kind of figure out who they actually want to speak to out of that that initial bucket of mass application?
Yeah, it's a tough one because you're right. You're not getting your resume is never getting the attention that you think it should, right? Regardless of who you are at this stage, because there's just too many to go through and really appreciate all the fine detail and bullets and formatting and everything. Instead, whether it's a hiring manager or actually as is often the case, it's a recruiter who's doing a first pass on a lot of these. They're looking for specific things that make a resume different from someone else's, and not in terms of like font or anything, but I mean the specific set of qualifications or call outs that what we're looking for, what we posted in our job application, in our job description, is exactly what's showing up in the resume. Like when I work with a recruiter who helps me to screen through a lot of mine, it's exactly what's happening. He goes, okay, what are you looking for in this position? I describe it. He says, great, let's update the job description to have those things as well. So it's no secret. Like that's what's going to make you pass the first round, is how well does my resume that I submitted match up with what they're looking for. And if you can find a way without spending hours and hours on every single application, I'm just adding a little bit of tailoring to your resume, it's going to go a long way to get you past that first screen.
And then Chris, I know that you're coming at it more from that recruiter side a little bit. Do you want to add in any additional context there?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things everything that Jack said, to be honest. I think it's especially in a market like today where you're quite right, you have 2 a day or maybe sometimes even hours of an advert being posted. And then in that time, there's lots of applicants. I think you have a very finite time. If your resume, your CV gets looked at, you have a very finite time to catch the eye of the person that's reviewing that application. And as Jack said, it's difficult to know sometimes who's actually reviewing it. But I think one of the main things that, and I look at a lot of resumes, the main thing is have a clear and easy to digest resume first and foremost. So it's easy to read, it's easy to digest. It's not, and I know that this is difficult, right? Because I think there's this. And to correct to some point, but there's this perception that your CV or your resume needs to be 1 page or 2 pages, and sometimes people have difficulty trying to condense it all into that 1 page or 2 page. And I think it's about, as Jack said, tailoring it to the position, tailoring it to, if you can, potentially the hiring manager or the person within. And if it's a hiring manager, it's probably going to be still similar to the HR or the talent person or the recruiter. The talent person or the recruiter will probably be looking for keywords as opposed to trying to understand or being able to understand what's beneath the surface. I mentioned earlier on that I have SEs that have to try and simplify things, or do simplify things for me quite often. So it's about trying to use your knowledge or use your experience, have it clearly defined, tailor it to who you think might be on the receiving end, and just make it very clear. Even, to be honest with you, for particular positions that you're applying for, if there's specific experience that you have and there's relevant technologies that you have on your resume, then even embolden them, right? Have a summary at the top. A lot of people I speak to have kind of a summary section on the first page, right at the top of their resume. And it depends how technical the position is. Usually, if it's more technical, there'll probably be more space for this, or there'd be more relevance for this. But even some of the softer skills that we've all mentioned, even have those bullet pointed, just so that it's easy to see, it's easy to catch at first glance. I think those are the things that stand out when I'm looking at resumes. Is that does this person understand, or to the level that they can, understand what it is that we're looking for from the description that we've posted, and have they looked at, listened to, and then try to reflect the relevant experience, knowledge, understanding in their resume. And again, if there's lots of different applicants, then how easy is that to define for that person that's looking? And any achievements as well. I'd always include achievements in that, you know, if there's a quota or if there's a team target and what you did to get to that. I think those things are the things that stand out to me and make you stop and read the rest of the resume for starters. I think that's how you to hook a hiring manager's attention, because that's not their day job, right? They're doing 100 other things possibly that day. So you need to try and grab their attention.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, continuing on, kind of, beyond the resume stage a little bit as well, what are kind of the frequent reasons that you see candidates being overlooked for certain pre-sales roles? And Chris, feel free to just continue on there. I know you're on a roll with the resume side of things.
So I guess the ones that the most common and probably some of the most avoidable, I think, or certainly the first one I would say is research into the business, research into the person that you're talking to. If you have that opportunity and time to be able to research that person's LinkedIn. Obviously, the last session was there's a lot of conversation around LinkedIn and how that is, depending on where you've applied. I think even though you probably submit your resume, I think people will also look at your LinkedIn pretty quickly once they've had that initial look and see that it's of interest. But it's taking the time to really research, like discovery, I guess, to a degree, right? As an SE, discovery is very important, and I think this is no different. Researching the people that are interviewing, the position, the company, to a point that you feel like you can really, and again, a word that was used a lot in the last session, authenticity, that you can really authentically approach that position, or approach that company, or approach that person, and tell them why you want to work for that company, or why you applied for that position. I think the people that I see that have the most success is they have a real authentic, clear motivation as to why they'd want to work for that company or in that industry or with those people. So I think that's probably the most common mistake I would see is research into whatever interview stage it is, but a lot of the time it is first stage interviews, and putting some time aside to really understand who it is and what it is you're going to be talking about.
I would echo a lot of what Chris was
Jack,
saying. Oh, sorry.
Please go ahead.
I'd echo a lot of what Chris was saying. Sorry for jumping in. I think it's really tough, because especially if you're out there and you are just trying to land any SC job, whatever your situation is, it's tough because you really just want to get an SC job, and you really don't care often about the industry. You don't care about the company. You're like, look, I'm just looking for a pre-sales role, and I can learn the company. I mean, I've talked to people who that's been their approach to. I can learn the company. I can learn. But that approach rarely gets you to the next round, because a big part of the interview process when I'm interviewing an SC is, can they do basic discovery? Even if they don't know my industry, can they read through the website briefly and learn a little bit about it? I'm not saying spending hours and hours, but spend 20 minutes to a half an hour. And that's kind of part of the interview process, and is important for someone in sales to be able to do some basic discovery, as Chris had said. So I would definitely highlight and say, don't do the thing where you're just saying, look, I can be a great SC wherever, and that's why I'll be great here. Be specific, learn a little bit about the industry, show you can do research, and apply that in the interview.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense as well. Thanks for adding that on, Jack. So now that we're kind of through that sort of like initial first conversation, what about any other mistakes that might happen a little bit later on in that, in the deeper in the interview process as well? Liz, you didn't mention anything before. Do you want to jump in here and kick us off?
Yeah, I think in general, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is just not asking for feedback on the interview itself. There's so many people, that is a key opportunity to get understanding maybe what hesitations they might have around putting you in that role. So different companies are going to have different policies around sharing that information. So for instance, when I was a hiring manager, I couldn't share it, but even just the sheer fact that somebody asked that question, that shows a little bit about some of the competencies. Like, they're probably more coachable, they're more receptive to feedback. There's something a little bit more like that growth mindset of something that is someone like a hiring manager like me, like I would be looking for. But let's just say you do get some feedback on there. That is absolute gold, because what you're doing is you're getting a direct line into why the hiring manager either might have reservations or hesitancies around like putting you into that particular position. And not only that, you can address them on the call itself. When are you going to get a chance to say like, hey, what hesitation do you have? Hey, actually, here's a response to this. But you're taking it you've got to take it as a way where it's great feedback. Hey, that's understandable. You can't just go and like be combative to it. That's the only other like caveat I would add to that. It also, if it's more of like the feedback versus the hesitation approach, now you're getting really great insight into how you can improve for the next interview and the next process that you're going to go into. Being an SC, part of this job is you are always constantly looking for ways to improve, and you can improve if you're not getting that insight. I've seen people wait until after the interview or after the process to get feedback, and I'll say sometimes you'll get it, but by that time, you might not really get great feedback, or they might have already moved on. So I would highly recommend doing it in the actual interview itself.
That definitely makes sense. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with Liz. I think, and part of some of the biggest struggles from a recruiter perspective when you're working with companies or working with hiring managers is getting feedback. Not necessarily getting feedback, but getting feedback that isn't. We went with someone else because they were a stronger fit, right? Like that's not feedback. That's just a statement that isn't necessarily helpful for anybody, especially if they've invested time in an interview process, right? So I think, yeah, ask for feedback on the call, absolutely, and yeah, any tips that you can or they can suggest to improve. I think that's always really important, especially, yeah, I think from my perspective, having to chase people constantly for some feedback, even whether it's a yes or a no. I think sometimes it's even really useful to have why am I a yes? Why am I moving through to the next stage? Because then you can understand some of your strengths, some of your weaknesses, and this actually goes on to a topic that I think we're going to talk about a bit later on. But the other thing I would say is everybody gets flustered in interview, no matter how senior or junior you are. And I think one of the things that's very easy to do is, as soon as a hiring manager or the person that you're talking to has asked you a question, it's time to talk. And I think depending on the question and depending on how detailed or how technical or the scenario that the question or that surrounds the question, I think it's always important, if you need to take a minute a minute or two to just think about it, or a second just to kind of take a breath and go into it. I think a lot of us can get flustered, and a lot of us can just talk to fill gaps. And again, going back to the piece on communication for SEs and for solutions consultants, part of the job is that communication, right? So it's about kind of staying calm, staying patient, and ultimately, if you don't understand something, then ask again or ask for more clarity on the question. But I think that's better, and even just be honest, right? I speak to people and say that if you don't know the answer, rather than you can tell them you don't know, and then give them an understanding of what you might do or what process you'd go through. And sometimes that's just as good if they're not expecting a perfect answer, and sometimes they're not. So even if you just understand the way that you're thinking and the process that you're going through, I think that that's sometimes useful. But yeah, try as best as you can to not get flustered. Take time giving your answers, and try and be clear and concise. It's okay for there to be some silence.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I think a good transition point here is, obviously we're, especially coming off the last section all about personal branding. I think all of us are looking for different ways that we can do our best to stand out, even necessarily beyond the resume, beyond the interview process, right? What do you think some of the best ways are that candidates, can stand out during that hiring process, really make an impact beyond just like, hey, here's my resume, here's what I've done in the past. Jack, I know you were really excited when we were talking about this before. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is the most critical thing you should be thinking about going into an interview is really how would you answer that question of how am I different from anybody else who's going to be coming in and interviewing? Because think of it this way, like your answer to this is probably something like, I am consultative, I'm a good listener, I can help people to understand value. The problem is that every single SC that I'm going to interview is going to have those exact same answers to what makes you unique, which is actually a question I like to lead with in my interviews. What makes you different from any other SCs that are out there today? What makes you unique? And honestly, you need to figure out how to not blend in, but how to actually stand out. And the answer is, believe it or not, the things that you do outside of your work. If you were in the last session talking about, bringing in, I think one of the panelists was talking about running and like how they bring that in, and that's a part of what they do, and it's a part of how they connect with people. Great. Like, what else is it? Is it, you like to play, you go hiking, you bake bread, you do woodworking, like things like that, because that's what makes you a unique individual, a unique person. And likely those things are going to impact your approach to being a pre-sales professional. I've been a hobby dabbler. I don't know if that's the way of saying it. Like, I have had so many hobbies throughout my life, and some of them have stuck, some of them haven't. But every single one of them, I've learned something new about myself. And a lot of times it's like, wow, that's something that I can actually bring to work with me. And so highlight the things about you that make you unique from just the in front of the camera doing your sales role person. Bring all of that, and that's going to help you. Again, that's going to help you not to blend in, but to actually stand out from everybody else.
Yeah, if I can actually add on to that too, because I think it's so important. So many times I help so many people kind of in this hiring process, and some of the things I see people do is, how am I unique? Okay, here's the companies that I've worked for, here's the industries that I've been a part of. I mean, that's a part of it, but I mean, you could go to anybody who's been at those companies and you're not going to stand out from them. So why are you uniquely positioned? What are your strengths? And how can you actually integrate those into the answers? The questions that they're asking, you kind of need to curate what you want someone to get out of your response. How do you want somebody to view you? And what do you need that company to understand about you as an individual? How are you going to go the extra mile to show that? The other piece that I'll mention is, like, I think I kind of mentioned this before with craftsmanship, like, go that extra mile. I've seen so many people do so well, and then in the presentation stage, it's like it falls a little flat. Like, did you spend time on this presentation? Did you look at the formatting? Did you look at those things? And it seems silly, but it's that going that extra mile, that craftsmanship, that storytelling, which is also another way to really stand apart from the crowd. And if you can bring yourself into that, if I can see a little bit of you and your personality, that's icing on the cake.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with both of you more. I think, and this relates very much so, as I think both Jack and Liz said, that to the last session, because of the way that the market is, because of the volume of applications on LinkedIn and through company pages. I think you have to stand out somehow. I think cover the bases and apply on those channels, but I think be active in your community. The PreSales Collective have a great community, and I think that networking and working with, and I think networking to network. I think Aditya said that in the last session. Network to get to know people, network to to ask for, not necessarily ask for referrals or tell them you've applied for a job, but do some research, do some discovery on, and look at who you want to be connected with, and essentially, even if it's engaged with their content, comment, and this is mainly LinkedIn, I think, that most people use for this, but create content or even supporting others' content, and sharing resources, reposting, and using that to network with people about, again, outside of work topics, even potentially in work topics, if there's a passion you have for an industry or a technology or something else, that you share that with people, and you show, as Liz said, you show your personality. I think that's important. We've come from, when I was first looking for a job way back when, it felt like a very formal process, and you had to be, not that you should be impolite, but you had to be polite, you had to be buttoned up. And I think now, certainly in technology, which is where I do most of the work, in terms of recruitment, there are still some like that, of course, but I think a lot of it now is, to stand out, it's about personality, and it's about showing some of those soft skills that we talked about earlier on. Storytelling is another one that I think was mentioned in the personal branding session before. Storytelling is huge in solutions consulting and sales engineering work. Can you tell the story about you, and does that resonate with the person that you're reaching out to? So yeah, I think that's some of the things that I would say on top of what Jack and Liz mentioned.
Yeah, I think those are definitely a lot of great tips as well, on top of everything else how that's been going on today too. That's one of the reasons that I've tried to get as small the pre-sales collective as I can, right? It's really being out there, being visible, networking with everyone, working and volunteering with the pre-sales academy as well. It's all in that same kind of effort to help grow that network, and really, like you were just saying, Chris, show my own personality as well. So shifting gears from a little bit more of like the soft skills side of this, obviously, that's where a lot of the interviews and the hiring cycles will take place, but it's not the only thing that's going to happen, right? Liz, you were talking before how there's always going to be that technical side. There's the demonstration, the big software demo. Maybe it's, you can demo whatever software you want. Maybe a company is going to say, hey, you have to demo our software to us, to the experts of that software. That's always part of it. But even beyond the physical software demo itself, one of the things that I've always thought about is what kind of additional certifications and formal education would be really beneficial, and how much does it really make an impact on my overall hireability as a candidate? Jack, do you want to go ahead and jump off?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. I thought you had asked it to Liz specifically. Yeah, I can give what might be a really hot take on this, and so I'm happy to be disagreed with, but I think it's overrated. I think certifications that you are pursuing for the purpose of trying to bolster your resume generically is the wrong move. And I'll caveat that, of course, but here's the reason why. Most of the time, most pre-sales roles don't have generic requirements around technology knowledge, right? And so instead, there may be specific things that the industry or that your specific job makes sense. As an example, there was one role that I was in that was getting a lot of questions about the way our software worked with certain things in AWS and in an AWS stack. So I went out and got an AWS cloud certified practitioner, kind of their base level certification, so I could answer those, at least understand the questions they were asking, even if I didn't know the answer. But me showing up to that job before I had gotten it, before I known that and gone out and got AWS cloud certified, it wasn't going to help me get the job. It wasn't going to really help me stand out all too much unless I got lucky. Now, if you're in the network, if you're doing something in, let's say, networking, right? And you've got, oh, goodness, I've now named an industry I know nothing about. Cisco, I don't know those certifications, probably, right? So if you're working in the networking industry and there's specific networking industry certifications, and that's what you're trying to pursue, that's the role you're trying to get into, then you probably already know the answer. Go get the things that are the standard for the industry. But I get this question a lot from people who are like, I don't really know where I want to work. I just know I want to get into pre-sales. So what certifications do I go after? Don't do that. Focus instead on improving your skills. Look at things like the Pre-Sales Academy, which we mentioned before. Obviously, fantastic way to grow. There's other programs out there as well to just becoming better at these things, such as demoing, presenting, doing discovery, that's going to be a much better use of your time and will set you up for success better in making that, getting to that hiring decision than a generic certification would. But anyways, that's my hot take. Happy to be disagreed with.
I think I agree, Jack, for the most part. I think you're right. I think if there's and it's funny you mentioned networking. That's something I've been looking at recently, not for myself, but for a requisition I'm working in. It's Cisco is what I'm looking for. So yeah, I know there are some industries, and if you have a really clear ambition or a desire to go down a specific route, and you know that it's going to need you to have some kind of qualification or certification, then absolutely. But I think generally speaking, I mean, I think there are different types of sales engineers. There's very technical sales engineers or solutions engineers. There's more commercial solutions engineers. I spoke to a global head of sales engineering this week, and she mentioned that she wasn't technical. In fact, she'd never been technical, but she was now running a global operation from a pre-sales standpoint for an AI business. So it just like, I think there's some businesses that obviously require you to be technical, but sometimes they have technical people and they have commercial people, and then they help each other out, right? So I think it's important to articulate the experience that you do have, whether that's within an industry that's relevant or technology that's relevant, or even if it's customer or market segment. If you've worked in the banking sector and you know how to communicate with those customers, or some of those customers that you'd be selling to within this position, that's going to be way more important to concentrate on and to articulate to a hiring manager than if you've gone out and done a particular certification that might or might not be, I don't know, let's just say a coding certification or qualification. Like, they do come in handy quite often, but just for that example, I think it's much more important to focus on what you can see and what you can present, or what your experience fits with and resonates with, than just trying to get lots of certifications to bolster your resume ultimately. And you'll learn within businesses when you get into the position. If you need to learn something, mostly you'll they'll help you with that, or at least they'll guide you through it. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, if I can add something here too, I feel like I'm going to take a step back and look at this from a higher level perspective, which is, I think when you're talking about any certification, education, anything that you're learning for, I think the thing that I think is most important, again, with the exception of certain industries where you have to have a certain level of knowledge or a certain certification, it's about, are you learning and growing in your profession? Like, if I see somebody's resume and I see a bunch of certifications, I'm like, hey, what are they interested in learning? Hey, they're actually interested in growing and they're teachable. Especially now that we're in a world where technology and our products are constantly evolving. We're in a role that we're always going to have to be learning. So it shows me that you're capable of learning new things. It shows me maybe particular things that you're interested in. I think one thing I will also say, and I see in the chat, a lot of people are like, what certifications, what to focus on, especially like if you're out of work right now. I think doing something is always a good thing, but I also, one of the reasons why I created pillars, which is put in there as well, is there's so much out there from like the technical side of things, but not very much out there from the soft skills, that where you are learning and growing and doing more. And I think when you have that balance, that's where you're really able to show that you are learning, you're coaching, you're coachable, you are always in that continuous growth mindset, which I think that is that important piece.
Yeah, thanks everybody for those fantastic points of view on certifications. I know we're coming up towards the end of our section here. I want to make sure that we still have some time for some Q&A, but I do want to ask one more question of all three of you here. I would love it if everybody could give me like a 10 to 15 second best overall hiring tip for any candidate, in order to make sure they can land whatever it is that next dream job is. Just like 10 or 15 seconds each would be perfect. Chris, I think you're on mute. It was bound to happen eventually.
Classic. Maybe, hopefully I'm not the first of the whole day. I'm not sure if it'll be 10 or 15 seconds, but I'll do my best. I think when you're applying, it's going back to the personal branding session before, it's trying a creative approach. So voice notes, videos. I think I saw in the chat earlier on, someone mentioned like a 30-second intro video, which you can send on LinkedIn you have to connect with them first, I think. And there's ways around it, I'm sure, but yeah, I think you have to connect with them first. But send an intro video that has a pretty high success rate, even if it doesn't fabricate into anything. It's different. Again, talking about network connections, engage with the people that you're talking to throughout the interview process. So connect with them, and sometimes this is by email as well, right? Sometimes people follow up by email. Prepare questions for interviews. Again, I know that maybe a lot of people will think that's quite straightforward, but you'd be surprised how many people don't. And sometimes there isn't any, right? Sometimes it's a really informative interview, but yeah, prepare questions, try and be as detailed and as honest as you can be with what your concerns are mainly. Be honest, clear, and concise. Again, I said that earlier on with your answers. And one of the big things for me that relates back to what Liz was saying earlier on, following up between interviews. So we talk about feedback. We talk about taking feedback on the interview. I think it's really important to also ask when you're when you'll hear back. When am I going to hear about next steps? I mean, obviously phrase it probably better than that, but yeah, when do you think I'll hear about next steps, and follow up with, is it okay if I check in if I haven't heard by then? Then you're setting up something for to speak to someone, and what's the best way that I can follow up. I think that's really important at the end of an interview to gauge timeline and interest, and then give you a reason to follow up and where to do it. So yeah, not 15 seconds.
All right, I'll go next. I'll be quick. I think the key thing is finding out what either the company or your hiring manager is looking for. Like, what is the unique need, not just the role, but the unique need that they have on their team. Look at your strengths. It's a Venn diagram. Where does that meet in the middle? Showcase that. How are you going to help their team? How are you going to be a force multiplier while also having a team first mindset? That's going to go a long, long way.
Yeah, I love that, Liz. I love the image of the Venn diagram. It's not some might take, but I'm taking that away myself. I think the biggest thing is be prepared for every step along the way. Because I've run into a fair amount, someone that by the time I'm interviewing them, I actually sometimes don't know who else they've talked to. And I've asked the question, who have you talked to thus far? And they say, it was like a recruiter person. And then I talked to someone I think who was in the sales team. And I'm like, you didn't even review who you've talked to. Like, so be prepared, go through your previous notes from previous conversations, be ready for, and then do a little bit of research on the person you're going to be talking to, figure out what they might be interested in, so you can keep your questions appropriate when you're asking them questions. If you're meeting with someone who is like on a different team, like maybe they're on the services team, asking them about the day-to-day of the pre-sales team, it just shows you're not prepared for the interview. So be prepared, do a little bit of prep. It's not much, 5-10 minutes beforehand. And that's going to go a long way every step. And that's basically a way to not fumble the ball as you're going through, to use a sports analogy that I use for some reason. I don't know.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up, the panel side of things here. So thank you very much to the three of you. I know we had some Q&A brought in, so I'd love to get to some of the questions coming in from the audience if the three of you are still up to it. So I think one thing that was brought up, and we were kind of alluding to it here and there, and I'd love if we could get an answer for it as well. I mean, what are any of your thoughts on basically reaching out to the hiring manager or recruiter before applying, following and applying, but like specifically, not necessarily only in like an email form, maybe even like a short video. Anyone have any thoughts on specifically sending like a video as part of a follow-up to an interview?
Yeah, do it. I mean, it's the hiring manager is probably going to get a lot, so don't be upset if you don't hear from it, but it's never going to be seen as a bad thing. But I would actually challenge you to go a step further, is that especially if you're still trying to get that first interview, or you're looking at doing others, do outreach to the rest of the team, people who would be your peers as well. use every channel of that outreach, and don't just focus on the immediate hiring manager, because people from my team will bring me people that they've met with who they think I should meet with. I pay attention to that a lot more than someone who sends me an inbox, something into my inbox directly. So yeah, I'd say definitely follow up, send a video, but also look to expand that outreach to others as well.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? Cool.
No,
Jackie, I think that
pretty good
totally
to me.
makes sense. Let's see. Could you speak on, reconciling having a clear and eye-catching resume with having a resume that parses well in ATS? Since there's a lot of automated filtering being done, how important is resume length? Is that still a big consideration? Chris, I saw you chuckling when I was going through that question. You want to jump in?
Yeah, just ATS systems generally, and applying for a job through a website. Sorry, the sun's now somehow right in my eyes in London, which is strange at this time.
Didn't know you
Yeah,
had
I
sun
think.
there. Interesting.
Yeah, well, apparently today we do. It's the first week of summer here today, or this week. Delayed, but no, yeah. I mean, ATS systems, I think, are just there needs to be something done about them generally, and uploading your CV or resume and then having to also fill out everything in part on the website individually. I think it's double. Yeah, it's unnecessary. But anyway, I think in terms of a clear and concise resume, I think it's what I mentioned earlier on. Just have, if there's technology required for the position, or if there's a requirement for industry experience. I used banking and finance earlier on. Like if you've worked with any banks or any financial institutions and you can talk about it, sometimes you can't, then I'd have that on there. And again, if it's specific to that position, then the higher on the CV or resume it goes, and obviously it has to flow to a degree, but yeah, within reason, the higher it goes, obviously the more likely it is to be spotted. So I think have those keywords, those relevancies on clear and concise on the CV. When it comes to different tenures, I'd have a line about what the company does that you work for, a line about your position within that company and achievements that you've had, and keep it to, if you can, keep it to some bullet points and a wrap up on achievements. I'd say that's probably the best way to have a concise resume, or one of the ways anyway, maybe not the best. But.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think we probably have time for one more question, and I love to get everyone's input on this one, just kind of like the last one I asked before. What questions have applicants asked during interviews that really makes them stand out above everybody else? And we talked about why asking questions ahead of time is so important. What are like one or two of the best questions you've been asked by a candidate, or you want to be asked by a candidate?
I'll start us off here. And it's not a particular question, but it's anything that showcases that you have done research, and not just like the stuff that's easily available on your website, but showcases that you actually understand something a little bit deeper about the product or the challenges that we're facing. If you ask me something around the challenges about something unique to the market right now, you're going to get my attention. And so it's less of a particular question, but more of a line of questioning that showcases that you know at least more than the average person.
I love that. I'm adding that to my list of takeaways from the session. I think the ones that it's categories. Are you asking a question that you really don't care about the answer to? I can tell. Like, or is it a question that you actually will determine whether or not you want to work here? Because which I really can't give a concrete. I'll try to give a concrete example. But if you can ask someone a question that I can tell the reason why you're asking is because you're trying to make sure that this is the right job for you, not you're asking me a question so that you sound smart, right? Those are the questions that I really appreciate. When someone asks me a question saying like, so what's next with your company? Like what product features are you working on next to stay competitive because X, Y, and Z seems to be what's happening, right? That surely shows a lot of research, like Liz was saying, but also shows you clearly want to know if this is the right role. And that's, for me, good, because this is a person who's being thoughtful about the companies and the jobs, right, that they go after, versus just someone saying, I don't know, something that makes them sound smart. more generically. So that's my take.
Both great questions. I mean, I can add mine to the chat if it's time. I just saw Courtney pop
You
up.
have some time to respond. You're
Cool.
good, Chris.
Okay. I think one of the interesting ones that I've heard, and I'm sure sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't, but I think you get a couple of different answers or perspectives on it, and that's the person that asked why do you? It was very blunt, and I don't know if I'd address it like this, but why do you lose to your competition? Something along those lines, like what challenges do you face versus your competition? Kind of similar to, in some ways, to what Liz was saying about challenges within the business. You know, why do you lose against your competition? Because you're going to either get an answer that is like I suppose, a constructive answer, or something where, you know, it's an honest answer, or you're going to get somebody that you'll get a reaction that you probably, yeah, that's quite maybe abrasive or defensive, or and you'll get to see the response from that. I mean, I don't know if I would use it necessarily. I think it depends on how you approach it. But that was just a really interesting one that that stood out to me. That this was a while ago, and I'll never forget it, because I was like, that's an interesting one. But it worked for them. So
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your insight there, as well as with everything else over the last 50-ish minutes. Big thank you to Liz, Chris, and Jack for this wonderful session. I really hope everyone here got a chance to learn something from them. I know I certainly did, and I'm taking this into all of the futuring hiring cycles I'm going to be part of from both sides of things. So thanks again, everybody, and Courtney, I'll pass it back over to you.